very much for your time this evening. I've got enough slides to take us to midnight, so I hope you're prepared. But I'll try and condense it into 39 minutes or so. It seems like I'm plugging a book that you're going to part money with. It's actually free, and this is partly what I'm sharing with, and you'll see in time how it explains the length of my fringe, because it did take quite a lot of emotion, and it was prompted by our customers. I run the consultancy side of Orangebox, and part of what we do is around the subject of rehabilitation and occupational health. And so our customers were saying to us a few years ago, when we had emerging technologies coming into the workplace, ones we hadn't seen before, look, we get ergonomics at the workstation, there's tons of standards around task chairs. What are we going to do about the subject of tablets and the fact that people are working on trains and from home? There's no guidelines, there's nothing to point us in the right direction. Can you do us a sort of 2-page pamphlet just to give people advice? Which we did, and everybody ignored, of course. And we realised that if we wanted to affect change, we had to understand some of the drivers behind technology. So this research was conducted partly through a global literature review. We had some help from University College London. We also did an online questionnaire with our customers, and we did think tanks, and we got some interesting groups of people together that hadn't really met before. So we had facility managers and architects mixed up with osteopaths, physios, teachers, educationalists, and we were really just posing the question about technology and how it was affecting their personal lives and the lives of their colleagues and friends in the workplace. So that's partly what I'm going to talk about. My background is furniture design and ergonomics. And so we were very interested in the fact that technology, of course, as always, catches off guard. If I can speak on behalf of the furniture industry, we're like an oil tanker. We're the last to respond to the changes in technology, and we know more than ever before it's having a profound effect on the way we work. It's affecting working practices. I think more than ever it's putting the spotlight on cultures within organisations, but also generationally and physically. We like looking through the lens of different generations. You've heard before us talk about boomers and millennials. I'd like to introduce you to another generation, but before I do, we'll have a quick poll without embarrassing people too much. But boomers, let me just remind you, 1945 to 65. Can I have a show of hands for the boomers in the room? I'm just on the edge of that. We've done well, haven't we? We're still here. And sitting so far from the toilet conveniences, we can do this. This is us living on the edge. And we've got perhaps bookended at the other end with the millennials that we keep talking about. Born 1980 to 2000, can I have a show of hands? You know, you technology guys, you know, who are very fluent and teaching us how to use it. But there's Gen Z, of course, born from year 2000. Those of you who've got small children or nephews and nieces, they're actually starting in your workplaces from next year, and they are truly immersed in technology. You can buy potties with tablet holders. This is how serious it's getting. And I'm allowed to say this, if we don't keep an eye on all these drivers of change, we will have a problem with morale and productivity in the office, if not more profound effects on physical and mental health. So that's partly what I'm talking about. The first half will be incredibly depressing. You will feel perhaps a tad suicidal. This is a networking event. Feel free to hold a neighbour's hand, and the windows are locked. Right. The research, this is slightly out of date now, but the research suggested by 2015 a third of us would be working away from the office, if not the desk. I think that is higher now. Some figures are more like 40, 50%. Of course, this varies from organisation to organisation and country to country. And the triggers for change, you may not be able to read the screen completely. Some of them are obvious about digital content, reliable broadband. We've gone from manufacturing to service-based. This new generation thing is very interesting for us because they're driving it. We have done some studies looking at the ratios of pupils to devices. They will be 1-to-1 in the next 3 years globally. Some of us, and a friend in the audience, Simon and I have been looking at this from a standards perspective. So India are developing their own version of a tablet. Turkey have got rid of textbooks. Italy's going the same way. In the UK, just 2 years ago when we did this research, the Department for Education said, we've got no handle on this. Should we be bothered? Well, there's a lot of research getting excited about the attainment. The teachers love it because they can download wonderful apps on the subject. The parents like it because they can check the progress of children online, and the children are laughing because they're more fluent than those other two groups. But who is actually looking at the health consequences of so much exposure to these devices? So in the office world that we're used to, we've had regulations for the last 20 years. That was a reaction to a spike in ill health when we got sedentary. Now, a lot of you are in the architectural and design community, and the boomers amongst us will remember things called drawing boards, standing desks. Standing desks have been around for a long time. We used them. They were called drawing boards. It was a very active exercise on AO. You had your workouts, stand aerobics. It was there. We invented it. And now it's being reinvented again. And we had a lot of regulations around the fact that as soon as computers came in and we became far more static, ill health went through the roof. Now, the BBC and other news programmes have just cottoned on this the last year. Sitting is the new smoking. But actually, we've known about it for a while. Meanwhile, in schools, there's nothing protecting children in terms of what happens to the health consequences when using these devices. We'll come back to that later. But the challenge is, if we're talking about spaces right now that will last for the next 10, 15 years, half of your intended audience will be this generation. So we just need to keep an eye on it. Of course, we're carrying 2 or 3 devices around with us all the time. We've got exposure to this sort of thing. Talking of which, someone's trying to ring me now. So I'll put that down. And there's new symptoms that have come out. GPs are seeing a rash of iPad neck, BlackBerry thumb, and we've all suffered from nophobia, haven't we? The fear of leaving your phone at home and the stress that causes, or not getting internet connection, or my one, which I don't mind sharing with you as long as you don't tell anyone. I get phantom vibrations in my leg, and I think the phone's going off, or I'm frisking myself when someone else's phone goes off. We're absolutely surrounded by this stuff. What does that mean in terms of our health? And we need to, the first lesson, I think, is we need to make friends with a digital futurist of some kind, because we've got to predict what's coming down the track. Okay, Google Glass didn't quite work, but believe you me, with 1,000 developers employed by Glass, intelligent services will mean something quite different in the next 5 years. It won't be just in the police dramas when they're sweeping bits of glass and reading the technology. Social media in the workplace. I'm a boomer, I might be a middle manager, I've just got used to the fact that I'm running my team quite successfully, then suddenly I'm told my team's gone virtual. How do I cope with that? And I don't mean because the company's big enough that they've got staff all over the world. I'm talking about a team that might be just on a few floors above me and it's all gone virtual. How do we deal with this sort of stuff? There isn't really a textbook. We just have to kind of learn this stuff. So I've mentioned some of the issues going on. This is an interactive session. We've got 3 to get through. So the first one, if you can humour me and all put your arms out in front of you, I want you to experience some of the ill health that's gone on historically. You're allowed to wiggle your fingers while I explain some of these issues. In developing countries where they've had nothing and adopted technology, like India and Africa, they're now seeing something like 3 in 10 visits to the doctor are technology related, with topics like iPad neck, texting wrist and BlackBerry thumb. But what about the things that we're not measuring? Because when you get physical aches and pains, like you're beginning to with your shoulders, but keep it going, what about the stuff that we're not measuring, like eyesight? The deterioration of eyesight from holding a tablet 10 centimetres closer to us than a book. That's what we do. And we forget to blink. So we have something called dry-eyed syndrome because we're not lubricating our eyes. Or we've got what they called mombies. Mombies are... I didn't say put your hands down. Mombies... Keep going, keep going. Mombies are the zombies who are walking and texting, and pedestrian fatalities around the world in all the major cities have spiked because people are falling down manhole covers and walking in front of buses. And rest. Now, were you beginning to feel any aches and pains in your shoulder? Look, you're in sales, aren't you? I can tell you two. Come on, bring it on. Well, it's optional if you want to rest. The point is, did you start feeling any pins and needles in your shoulders and neck? Did it hurt? Could you, put it another way, could you work like that all day? No. Well, ergonomics anoraks like me have been called into offices for the last 20 years because of people with those kind of postures that you adopted. Because they push their keyboard away from them, they have their paperwork here, and their mouse has migrated towards the back of the desk, and they have worked like this for their whole career, and then they ring Michael and Jerry up at Walls to Workstations and say, your furniture's crap, isn't it? I've got terrible aches and pains. And then we have to politely explain to people, don't fight gravity. Guess what? Bring your keyboard here. The monks had it right, you know. Elevate your reading and writing material at 3 or 4 degrees. That's less flexion in the neck, and have everything symmetrical. So when they started talking about agile, smart working, activity-based working, all the health and safety ergonomics fraternity were saying to themselves, you know, we're quite pleased because we're going to get rid of some of those old occupational health issues that we have been trying to fight for the last 20 years and no one's listening. But of course, with any change in a workplace, you think you've solved one problem, you've got to keep an eye on perhaps a new problem you weren't predicting. And these are discussions that are not taking place. The biomechanical problems, the visual problems, hearing problems. We've got children listening to music in their iPods at decibel levels that would be considered illegal back at our factory in Wales. 85, 90 dBA, and no one's monitoring this. So we're actually going to have to think about a wave of new occupational health issues. We're in the midst of one now, quite honestly. Graduates are more likely to have advanced back pain than any previous generation. And it's not through manual handling, it's through graduate laptop hunch. And it's already a serious problem. They're bringing their own chairs, they're bringing their own health problems into business. I told you it was depressing. And when we then take this subject a little further, and your screenager, nephew or niece, says my best friends are online anyway, and they're falling asleep during lessons, and that's been recorded. 50% of teenagers in schools in the States are sleep deprived, because back at their entertainment centres, we used to call bedrooms, they are waking themselves up to every alert that's going on, or their best friend happens to be in France and they're in America. I can't help it, you know, they don't wake up till 3 a.m. and we've got this great game going on. They're just simply not getting enough sleep. And that increases the risk of cardiovascular disease and cancer. And it's happening around the world. Teenagers in a study in Bristol University have been looking at it. You know, the children they're all going to bed with their smartphones. So let's just be mindful of that. Thankfully, when it comes to standards and comes to what we do in the furniture world, we're trying to get a little bit more inclusive, because the standards themselves are based on anthropometric data. If you remember those days at college studying anthropometrics, you know, the science of, you know, body dimensions and performance is woefully out of date. So there's us sort of feeling quite proud of the fact that we've designed for 5th to 95th percentiles. That's based on data that's 30 years old. We're bigger than ever before, we're more diverse ethnically, and we're also taller than we ever were. 50% of the UK by 2050 will be deemed clinically obese. That's the way it's going. And there's not enough of a change going on that front. So there's a reason why the government have woken up to this. So if you're thinking, do we really have to bother with this activity-based working? You'll be dragged kicking and screaming, because governments around the world are saying our health systems are full of weight-related illnesses like diabetes, and we now want you lot to be champions of health. Mr. Bank, Mr. Energy, Mr. Public Sector, you have to get proactive with your health disciplines and with your buildings. How many people have heard of the Well Building Standard? Can I have a show of hands? You don't count because I've just told you about it. 1. The Well Building Standard will be coming here, if it isn't already, very shortly. And it's started from our green friends but it's talking about the health of the occupants in the building. And they're going to measure the building, and you can be accredited for a bronze, silver, platinum for nutrition, fitness, comfort, air quality, and various other factors. And it's raising the bar for all of us so that we can actually measure people's progression with their time in an organisation, so that people get fitter rather than get more and more ill. There we go. I apologise, this seems like a scattergun approach. So I'm going to talk a little bit about a few different subjects, but they're all related. So we talk about flexible working in the same breath as well-being, and that's partly because it gets sold to us as, hey, listen, you know, you need to spend more time with your family, you've got more control of your work-life balance. By the way, from an employer's perspective, it's been proven you get more hours out of people. So the traditional idea that I need to see them at work and see they're working, you know, your working life is your waking life. I mean, it's a rather outrageous question, but sir, do you brush your teeth first thing in the morning, or do you check your emails? Teeth. Correct answer. But it could easily be emails, couldn't it? I mean, basically, if the culture of your organisation hasn't got a handle on this, while you're awake and the boss has sent something at 10 p.m, do you respond, don't you? So flexible working is quite interesting from that perspective, but it's also a way of attracting talent as well. It doesn't suit every culture, and famously, some of them are saying, actually, I want our spaces even more attractive to attract people in, keep them in, let's have the internal streets and shopping malls and have the football pitches and various other things. What we do know is the subject of more collaborative working and a flatter structure from a hierarchy point of view is getting results. The only thing Gensler reminds us in their research in 2013 is we're missing a trick in terms of privacy. So we're all talking now, even the Americans who have found it difficult to let go of their cubicle spaces are embracing collaborative working, but we're missing a trick in terms of quiet. So there's an arms race amongst my industry for these pop-up meeting rooms and meeting pods that you can move around where you know you've got a problem with acoustics, or you need to have a spontaneous meeting with someone. That brings us into the subject of acoustics. Now, I think half of you, I'm sure, are pretty familiar with this topic. In your profession, you know you're far more fluent than we are in the furniture industry, but we've had to try and wise up on the subject. So it's physics, in a way, that scares us. But it isn't just physics, it's psychology. Because what is sound and noise? Well, noise is only unwanted sound. So if we take music, half of us would think one section of music is noise and the other half would think it's sound. What we can do is take it from just a bit like our furniture, take it from being how do we mask unwanted sound and get the etiquette right, to actually using it as a proactive tool that can help us. So playing with evocative sounds to improve productivity. The Times newspaper, for example, in London, when the reporters have a deadline, they pump out the sound of old-fashioned typewriters. For the boomers, it gets them there because it reminds them of their youth. And for the youngsters, it's quite novel. But either way, there's something about the sound that gets them going. Or in schools, birdsong after lunch to pick them up after lunch. So not only can we just simply use controlling acoustics as a thing to stop stress, we could maybe in the future use it as something that is a useful productivity and happiness tool. So the second person we need to get friendly with is an acoustician, who's also dabbled in workplace psychology. What we can predict is the workplace is going to get really loud and with lots of noise. If I put almost like a thermal map over a floor plate, the hot spots of stress are around noisy things. That might be photocopiers, it might be someone with a loud telephone manner. You know who they are, and it actually does evoke quite a bit of stress. And there's me talking about flexible working. You know, why don't you work from home? You know, you'll feel more independent. You've got to get the balance right. So if you're reducing real estate and you're expecting more people to share the space, you must make sure that they're allowed to come back in from a social perspective and also from a business perspective. Because if they're at home, there's a fear that they won't get promotion, they'll feel left out, and the facts are that you are less likely to get promoted, and your colleagues do think you're building an extension. So these are all things to be mindful of when we're talking about shared spaces. All I'm saying is switched on all the time, we've got to watch out. We used to call occupational health, topics like back pain the number one reason why people are off work. It's not now, it's stress. You can soldier on at work with a back pain, but if you're stressed, all those lovely processes you have and relationships you have go out the window. And I'll be talking about presenteeism a little bit more in a second. So we've got absenteeism, that maybe affects 4% of your business. Presenteeism, people coming into work who are disengaged, slightly stressed, that's 70%. I think that's where all of us who influence office space can have a big impact. The next interactive session, if I may ask you to stand. It's been 20 minutes. This is what the regulations tell us. Always good to go with a few sort of takeaway tips. My first one is, what's my first one? If you can put your arms out in front of you again. If you do suffer from RSI, a good tip to sort of reset the ligaments in the wrists is to take one hand over the other and just do this little exercise. If you've done a lot of heavy typing, and then swap hands. And then while you're there, more for the men than the women, all will be revealed. But if you can all clasp your hands and do this, and then move your head to the left and to the right, keep breathing. That's a subtle way of checking for personal hygiene in the office. Right, you can all sit down now. Has Dublin discovered cycling? Yes. So you are either that person in Lycra emitting, or you're sat next to that person in Lycra being emitted to. Is that English? We have a problem in London because the FMs haven't caught up with showers and lockers and things like that, so we have a serious smell problem going on. Anyway, this, I was on a train recently. If you want to be really clever, I could call it a mobile co-working capsule, couldn't I? Because trains are now places where everyone works, and this character decided to convert the luggage rack as a standing workstation. There were plenty of places to sit, and for 2 hours they were stood like that. And it reminded me when I went backpacking years ago, I just graduated in ergonomics, got very excited about this brick maker in India who had carved himself out of the clay bank a perfect standing workstation. I didn't jump in there, but I'm sure his elbow was 50 millimeters above the workplace for assembly work, textbook. His friends were all squatting, and their productivity was about half of his, and he's probably still doing it now. His friend, perfect manual handling squat, 14 more bricks to go on his head before he moves off to the kiln. So he's learnt the hard way how to lift. Fantastic team. Meanwhile, back with Gen Z, this is their workstation. We don't take any notice of this, but the osteopath and chiropractic waiting rooms are filling up with teenagers who are working like this. And I think the point for all of us is, I want you to take your put your ergonomic specs on, go back to your clients and to your own studios, and see if humans, your human friends, have adapted the environment to make it more comfortable. That's a sign that your workspace isn't working very well. 2 of these are mine. They had a tablet. They'd worked out themselves that viewing it on a flat surface gives them neck ache. Their perfect viewing station is the bottom of the stairs. Hands-free. Finn passed out, but the rest were absolutely fine. So we're banding around these topics when we talk about well-being, and this well-building standard, look it up, because you'll be having to fill in the form soon for a tender and get your heads around it. Health. A state of mental and social well-being, and not merely the absence of disease. So that knocks out most of the health and safety Gestapo stop-it police. It's not about just you must sit up. It's actually taking it beyond thinking that you've stopped them complaining, or that you need to throw some special equipment at them. Well-being brings all of us in this room together. A dynamic process emerging from the way people interact with the world around them. That's our profession. We've got a part to play in terms of well-being. And the stress thing, all of us have different thresholds. And what they're beginning to do in workplaces is not only screen us physically so that we have an idea of what our blood pressure's like and our cholesterol and things like that. They're screening us mentally as well to see whether you're an introvert, how you like to receive information, the kind of spaces you want to work. Some of this has come out of America, but the idea of spaces that are a bit more individual to map our physical and mental profile will be commonplace in the next few years. Lots of stuff about the benefits of well-being. Of course, it's about saving money, but actually it's about retaining and attracting staff and being more competitive. You get your money back on the subject. I've touched on presenteeism, and I think that's the area we need to concentrate on. The 70%, I mean, we all think about an average year. You'll have your ups and downs. But if you're stuck in a department with a lousy manager and you've got conflict with another department and you're in a lousy space, then your presenteeism levels will be more constantly poor. And that's what we're looking at. So I've been talking about well-being for the last few years, and some of our clients have said, come and have a look at our space. Look, we do well-being, we've got a bowl of fruit. Well, it's not, it goes a bit beyond that. Or we've put some cereal bars in our machine. This is a call centre in Cardiff. 600 staff share this one machine. They queue up for 20 minutes. They're only allowed a 10-minute break. It's not quite there. Or the Chinese who've noticed that spike in pedestrian fatalities. I know what we'll do. We'll have pedestrian texting lanes. And the funny thing is he's so absorbed in his phone, he's wandered into the no cell phone zone. He was arrested 3 or 4 years ago. We haven't seen him since. And I'm going to have a pop. I'm sorry. I know we all want to get very kind of, you know, the millennials, therefore they must like bean bags. You know, I've been on site with bean bags inappropriately specced. You know, someone who's 55, they might have, you know, them, you know, who knows, they might wear a skirt. And they're saying, I have to text a friend to get out the bean bag, it's embarrassing. Or we've gone all concrete and it's like having your head in a biscuit tin. That's a 2-minute sit. I was in Canary Wharf and they had these meeting room pods open, made out of shuttering ply. Who's brought shuttering ply into this world? Raw shuttering ply. Just everything gets trashed. And I was in this bay with these raw, you know, funky things going on. Bay 1, Bay 5, a banker whispering to his mum to return his library books. I could hear everything he was saying. And education. We can start with a bit of education etiquette. And I hope you don't recognise this lady, because I took a photo of her illegally. I shared a train with her to Swansea. I thought she'd died. She hadn't moved for 2 hours. So I sneakily took a photo. Thankfully, her eyes were open. She had 2 phones on the go, one with Twitter, one with Facebook. And she was like that until we pulled up to the station. She suddenly got up and with a big frisbee red mark on her face and staggered off. And if you want to sort of carrot and stick with this well-being subject, you know, come on, get a bit of fresh air at lunchtime. Will you? Okay, well, look, read this Which report, which did some tests on all the micro little things going on your screen, and there are more nasty things going on under the microscope than your average toilet on a shared workstation, particularly when you're going to drop lots of food on it. So you'll read a lot about this. Well-being is about leadership, culture, communication. And it's important because you might do the hard work of getting your space right and it's tumbleweed when it's opened because the leadership don't get it, people think they haven't got permission to use it, or nobody told the technology department, so there isn't a phone between the whole, you know, population, a mobile phone, or there's no, you know, laptops or anything like that. But in that transformation team, there are a few new kids on the block. If you haven't made friends with them yet, to make the space successful, apart from the usual suspects, having the technology influence in there and having human resources. Because human resources are now getting it for the first time, that the building and the space has something to do with their own objectives of retaining and attracting talent. And they're only just admitting it, and they're now getting very interested in the subject. So whatever profession we're in, I think this is a common watering hole. We talk about change management, resilience, engagement. I mean, it's harder than we think. That was just to remind us that we're going from people like me avoiding premature death within your organisation to high levels of wellness, where you're having a rather It might be embarrassing the first year you do it, but talking to your boss about how many steps you've done that year rather than whether you've reached your sales target. And you think I'm making that up. People are being paid cash if they achieve 6,000 steps a day. And you think, hey, but actually there's so many wins, they're fitter, they're more alert, and they're more likely to have met half a dozen colleagues, which they have failed to communicate with through email. So there's lots of sort of stealth tactics around this topic of wellness, which is actually kind of greasing, the cogs of industry. I'm conscious of time. Am I all right for another? Yep. How long have I got? 5 minutes. Okay. We know the marketeers have had this right for a while in terms of adverts. You remember the humorous ones, but it's a point to nod the hat at the psychologists again, because if you want a change of career, you could be humour consultants. They're being paid a lot of money now to engage with companies. And there is a point to this, because, put it another way, if you've got someone who's cynical in your team, you know who they are, glass half empty the whole time, they drag the department down. And a Chilean psychologist looked at these ratios and suggested that if you want to increase positivity in an organisation, because there's another accreditation you could go for, on the happiness index. There's a few versions of this where there's a whole kind of thing around the companies you want to work for. You need a ratio of 6 positive comments to 1 negative, because at 3 positive comments to 1 negative, they wipe each other out. In London, we're 1 to 10 the other way. That's how miserable we are. But I hope in Dublin it's a different story. And those who are old enough to remember Maslow's hierarchy of needs with your management studies, we kind of forgot some of this in the 80s and 90s. You know, that the physiological needs are at the bottom of all this. You know, the shelter bit, the building. We can't start going on to some of the other fantastic engagement things until we've got that right. And if you haven't heard of Maslow, think Bear Grylls, if you have Bear Grylls over here, when he puts people on an island, and for the first 15 days, they're all fighting each other and dying, basically, because they haven't thought about a shelter. They're getting eaten alive by all the animals. Then they realise they've got to build a shelter. They get a good night's sleep, and they start organising themselves. It's a fascinating kind of management thing, really. And then they start fishing, and then they start doing all sorts of things. And there's a new one for the young generation. Basically, technology is the oxygen of the young. Without technology, they die. We know this because we do lots of university work. If there isn't a plug socket every 3 meters, they shrivel up. And so they have to be connected the whole time. And we have to bear that in mind. Not that technology needs to be a slave, but that we should use it in the right way. And back at that Welsh call centre, in terms of benchmarking, I mean, everyone talks about we need measurement, and there's going to be a really important conversation with the next speaker, Simon, on we need some facts, because this all sounds a bit fluffy. Let's get some data in. So Simon's going to explain a bit more about that. But when they did some measurements at this study, of the top 10 sort of dissatisfaction things that came out of the employees, 5 of them were FM related. You know, let's have more vending machines. Let's, you talk about stress. I'm stressed before I come in the door because I can't get a parking space. Then the workstations are filthy. The restorative areas aren't very, inspirational. And so we can start drilling down to how space can actually help us. So as an ergonomist, I can do you an amazing ergonomic chair. It will look like it's going to electrocute you. I need the help from the psychologists. Design is so important, and particularly for the new generations. When I graduated from Trent Poly in furniture design in the 80s, IKEA hadn't been invented then. We all wore home knits for some reason, and we inherited our sofas from our grandparents. I don't know why, but it wasn't very inspirational as a young designer. Now, young people are very savvy. They've got smart everything, haven't they? And they will prefer to work in call centre B, where the space is cool, versus call centre A, for that very reason. And human-centred design, I think the Hamlin Institute's another one to look up. This is all in that book that you're going to take home, are unlocking a lot of interesting stuff in the world of neuroscience, which I think can help us in design. So I touched on standing workstations earlier. Whether you like it or not, the World Building Standard will measure you to see whether there's 40% of the workstations that have that facility. Now, we're not talking about necessarily electric desks, but giving the people the opportunity to vary where they work, and some of the time standing's good for you. So it could just be fixed heights, it could be banks of storage with a worktop on top of it. And we've got something for another day, or if any of you are interested, we've got a few ideas that we apply so that you can think about how the space supports the well-being strategy. So I'll take an example. This is the bottom of our showroom space in London. We have zoned out the various spaces in terms of activity. So at least we've got a short list of the right sort of furniture that goes in there. And in terms of the furniture, in these collaborative spaces, there are no standards to refer to. So we talk about an ergonomic footprint. So there's, sofa A could be quite deep and very low, and you're likely to feel a bit fatigued after a few hours, if not spill your coffee. Or furniture that perhaps thinks about egress and ingress, has a supportive lumbar, you can plug in, has some acoustic control, has a surface where you can work, is reconfigurable, nobody died during installation, that sort of stuff. And you can start putting actually quite objective measures on how you put that furniture together. And then, what are the clues that there's a well-being strategy in this space? Well, we might have meeting chairs that articulate. You're on four-legged chairs, you'd have lost concentration 5 minutes after I started, and maybe woke up a bit when I got you standing. I'm not knocking you, that's just the way it is, because you're very static. When you're in chairs that articulate, there's more oxygen to the brain. It's a simple trick. Having some acoustic control. So if you've got a manifestation on a wall, put it on a soft wall, which has foam behind it to trap some of the sound. Having walking meetings in the carpets, so that we can encourage people to actually get up from their desk, and we might well have a signpost that says 1,000 steps, 10-minute meeting that way, 5,000 steps up there in that way, 30-minute meeting, and have some colourways to actually encourage some of that. There's a few interesting reports coming in thick and fast. Here's one from Unum, which was quite interesting. And because I had my 50th recently, I'm going to plug this first one. Energised to work forever. There may be a time in the future, and this is the predictions for 2030, where older people are considered wise rather than past it. Because actually the pension age has gone a bit weird, and we've now got our children who are borrowing lots of money off us. And so we have to work for a long time. So we need to design spaces for older people. And your eyesight goes in your 50s, but did you know your hearing goes? You start losing high frequencies. And so collaborative spaces are actually quite stressful for people like us because we can't hear what's going on. So we need to think about that. Mindfulness, has that come to Ireland? Yeah? What the hell's that? 2 years ago, we knew nothing about it, but children are being taught it. So we thought we designed meeting rooms so that people could have private conversations, but the next generation will see it as a place to practice a bit of mindfulness. And why not? A reaction to technology. Let's just stop and think about the present. And I think the other two we're already immersed in. So for the millennials in the room, this is the last experiment. Would you mind taking a shoe off? If you're born after the age of 1980, it's not compulsory, it's optional, because we've invented a new piece of kit, which is, it's called the walkie-talkie. Simon, would you like to demonstrate yours? It's got no batteries, there's no wireless problems with it, and the idea with these contraptions is that they're pretty ergonomic as well, come in all sorts of sizes. You put these contraptions on your feet, it's the way we're going to communicate in the future, and you walk to your colleague. Okay, and you stop sending emails. And I will give you the Orangebox FQS warranty. It's fitter, because Catherine in accounts is 1,500 steps away, and that is contributing to my bonus I'm going to get, because I'm now being paid on the number of steps I do. So that's the fitter bit. It's quicker, because I haven't had email table tennis for 4 days, copying more and more senior irrelevant people in until you have to get up and apologise anyway. And it's slicker because if you've done your job right and you've pulled people through some collaborative, interesting spaces, if they bump into someone, they can dive into an informal space and sort a second problem out, which you can't do with email. And you started work with email. Have you seen what she's wearing? Do you want to go for a coffee later? And now we've got, you know, telecommunication. There's even more reason to be static. When I started, the photocopy was the most important piece of equipment, and that was quite active because you followed your paper around. They're doing it in America. This used to be called a park, the High Line in New York. It's now a meeting space. It's a place where people meet for work and walk. And the Design Council in London are doing the same thing with walkways connecting businesses together. So we're now talking about urban design and how that might help us. I'm being waved at. That's the end of it, really. Is there a bombshell to finish off on? Probably not. Well, just a news flash. I took that away from them, and they had far more fun under the stairs, talking and collaborating and seeing how many people, you know, could fit under the stairs. Max has since dumped Rosie. And there we are. You didn't believe me about the potties, did you? You can buy them now. So whether you're that age or that person with influence, let's just bear all this stuff in mind. Thank you.